mouth. Get it out of your mouth. Just put water all over myself. Welcome to this week's episode of Work Bestie Business. We're going to talk about the famous question, when do I know when it's time to quit my job? Have you ever wondered to yourself, is it time for me to quit my job? Do I really want to keep doing this? What else might be out there for me? When do I know if it's time to take that leap? We're going to cover a few things today that might help you make that decision. Let's get into it, shall we? I think the first step is really understanding your why. Why do you want to leave this job? Why are you potentially not satisfied? Where is the root of this really coming from? Is it the job itself, the work itself? Is it the people? Is it the management? Is it the tools, the systems? Is it the environment? Really trying to ask yourself, what about this is not my ideal environment, so that you're able to identify potentially what needs to change or what different you want to achieve in order to get to whatever you're trying to achieve with your job. Many of us have different motivations. I know a lot of us share the same motivation as money, because that's essentially why we work, is to pay for the lives that we have. But there's a lot of other things that can contribute to questions like this as well. So really starting with your why, and also understanding your why doesn't need to be a huge negative. You don't need to have a really negative experience or reason in order to want to quit your job. Sometimes we just crave different. We don't need better, we just need different. Sometimes there are huge red flags that are making a big impact on us personally and professionally, and that's kind of what we want to address. But you don't need to have a massive negative and hate your job in order to want to change it. Let's start there. And if you're like, Laura, I don't actually know why I'm having these thoughts and feelings of wanting to change my job, let's go through a few different reasons of what contributes to people wanting to leave a job. So I was going through the Indeed career guide and I found an article listing some reasons that contribute to why people end up leaving their job. 1, underutilizing skills. You just don't feel valued at this job, like your skills are really being put to use. You aren't progressing, growing, developing. Overall skill set is just kind of like staying the same, and you're wanting something different. You're wanting more of a challenge. Your job is just not aligned with your passion. And I think for a lot of people, they don't need to be passionate about their jobs to be content with it. You know, you don't need to have a massive passion in what you do in order to keep that job. For many people, it works to not, and for many people, they want to have a little bit more passion in terms of what they're doing with their job, because overall, I think it does add an enjoyment element to the work that you are doing. So you're just not passionate about your job. Unhealthy work environments, and that can look so different for so many of us. Oftentimes when we talk about like a toxic work environment, unhealthy work environment, what's toxic to me might not be toxic to you. So don't take the blanket statement of like, this is really unhealthy in the workplace and be like, oh, I never thought of it. I have that at my workplace. Maybe that's really unhealthy for me, because the environments in which we all thrive are so wildly different. So you need to define a healthy environment for you and what helps you succeed within your job, and then be able to identify what potentially is unhealthy or doesn't set you up for success. No growth or development opportunities. Potentially you're at a job where that is the ceiling. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing else to learn. You're not adding any more value to the job. The job's not adding any more value to you. And that might be a deal breaker for you. Uncertain company outlook. So potentially you're at a job and your company's potentially going to get sold off, going to go through a big acquisition. Your job might not be available for you long term, or maybe you work in an industry that doesn't really have a long-term viability, credibility. It's going to go under in the coming years. Maybe it's getting replaced by tech. There could be so many different reasons for it, but maybe you want to shift into something new because you know where you are right now might not be here in 5 years. Personal ethics. So potentially you work for a company who you don't necessarily align with, but you needed the money and so you took the job. And then you might be having this internal moral debate of whether you are contributing to something you really don't believe in. And that can be a big contributor to wanting to leave your job. Understandably. Undercompensation. I'm sure that this is quite a common one, but potentially the job you're in, it's not paying for your bills, and also maybe is considerably under the market rate of your job or position, and within the company they're just not looking to pay you more for that job. Leaving the company, which we'll talk about a little bit later, might actually be your only way to really receive that salary hike that you're looking for. Value misalignment, which I think goes close in hand with the ethics kind of argument of your personal values, your company's values, or the people within your company's values really misaligned. So maybe there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes. There's some questionable behavior. You're starting to question how people are getting hired, promoted. You're just misaligning your values with the company you're working with. It can be hard to be put in an environment where you're so different. And I think that can start to feel really isolating if you're believing that everyone around you doesn't hold that same moral ethics, the values that you're holding. So that could be a big contributor as well. Unable to complete the workload. So maybe there's so much on your plate that you're noticing it's really, really impacting you mentally, physically. You can't keep up with the workload. It doesn't seem to ever be lightening up. And you're like, well, I need to do something different before I absolutely burn out. Or maybe you're already burnt out and you're like, help, I need to do something else. That would be a reason. Change in work-life balance. So work-life balance, work-life integration, work-life harmony, whatever you're gonna call it. I think it's important to remind yourself that work-life balance, for lack of a better term, is gonna look considerably different through every season of life that you go through. So in some seasons of life, work is gonna take a higher priority, other things are gonna take a lower priority. Potentially you see a big shift in season of life and suddenly family life or other things start to take a way bigger priority, and then work takes a little less priority. And so finding that job that works for your life versus making your life work for your job is really important. Lack of enjoyment. You are just miserable at work. You get to work and it just sucks the soul right out of you. It sucks the enjoyment right out of you. And you're like, I don't really want to live like this. I spend so much time every single day, every single week at work, and something that, you don't have to get a ton of enjoyment from your job. That's not what I'm saying. But if it is sucking the living heck out of you and really stripping you from lack of enjoyment or stripping you from enjoyment within life, that might be something you want to look at. But I will argue with that one, if there's a lot of other things that could potentially be done first before jumping ship, that could be a whole other discussion we have. But if you're at the point where you're like, there's no way I can resolve this, there's nothing I can do to fix this level of enjoyment, maybe you look for another job. Short-term stepping stones. Maybe you took this job on as a short-term kind of, I'm gonna gather a bunch of information, get exposure, and then I'm gonna move on. Like, it was never meant to be a longer-term goal of yours. You knew it was going to be that stepping stone, and you feel like you've got out of it what you set up to do, and now you're looking to move on. Those are some of the reasons listed in the career guide article that I found of potential things that might make you want to leave your job or when to know it's time to quit your job. But I think what's important to realize is everyone's situation is so different when it comes to quitting a job that it's so hard to see it in black and white, because it's not black and white. There's so much gray area when it comes to whether or not you know whether it's time to leave your job or not. And I think there's so many external voices that come at you to say, no, stay, you need the security, you need the paycheck. And someone else is saying, no, go. Like, you need to do something you enjoy and work with people that you like to be surrounded with. And someone else comes in and they say, well, why don't you look for a job internally instead of trying to jump ship? And someone else comes along and says, you know what, screw it, just quit and let's have a summer in Europe and take some time off. Figuring out what works for you in the situation of life that you're in right now. It's very irresponsible, in my opinion, to tell other people whether or not to quit their job and to give up their financial security or their income. If you're not in their shoes, I mean, you're taking on none of that risk, right? You're just basically saying, here's my opinion, do this thing. I'm not going to get impacted at all by the risk of it. I mean, unless it's your partner who you're sharing bills with, but you don't assume any of the risks. So when it's you personally, it's way more terrifying, and it is a way bigger decision than sometimes people can make it seem. So if you're someone who's feeling that of, think I want to leave my job, but I can't quite make that decision and it feels really big, well, it is big. And give yourself the grace to let it be big and to navigate it on your own time and on your own terms. I know I went through a massive career transition a couple years ago, and I was at a job that, there wasn't any huge red flags for me. I mean, everything comes with its little annoyances or things that you wish would be different, sure, but there was nothing that would say that was not a good job. It was a great job. And I worked with phenomenal people. And I was really close with my manager, and she was just such a great leader, and I have so much respect for her. But I also knew I wanted different. And I knew that the next step of my career needed to look a little bit different, and I wanted to pursue something else. Not to say there was anything wrong. I wasn't running from anything. I was running towards something I knew that I wanted to do. And it took me a long time to plan for that, and a long time to make that decision to commit. And I think that that's the scariest part about it all, is actually taking the step to say, hey, here's my X amount of week notice, I'm done. Like, making that commitment is the scariest part of it all from my experience. Once that's done, it's like, whew, okay. Then you step a little bit into the unknown depending on what you're doing next. And that's a different kind of scary, but committing to something that you know deep down is the right decision for you is terrifying. And it's also very empowering once you get there to know that I made this decision for myself. So if I fall flat on my face, that's okay, because I made that choice. I think there's a big difference when we're truly making decisions for ourselves, being able to deal with the consequences associated to that, versus if someone else was in my ear telling me to quit my job, convinced me of it, but I didn't believe it truly deep down. And then I experience a failure, or it doesn't go to plan. I'm gonna hold a lot more resentment and emotion and mixed feelings about that, because it wasn't really my choice fully and wholeheartedly. When I went through this massive transition, it was months and months of kind of thinking it through. And of course, everyone's situation is going to be different with this. There's definitely reasons that some people would need to quit more immediately, and it needs to be kind of a quick decision. But just speaking from my experience, I had to sit down and I had to go, okay, well, what's my financial situation? You know, how's my, for lack of a better term, people call it like an FU fund, just kind of a safety net fund, which I recommend everyone kind of have a little bit of a safety net fund put away from paycheck to paycheck, of just, if my job were to go away, I know that I could get by for X amount of months, years, weeks, days, whatever it is in your situation, with this fund, to just give yourself a little bit of a cushion there, but also knowledge to say, okay, in the situation where this happens, because, you know, we're talking about leaving your jobs here, but they can quit you, or they can fire you any day and just stop your employment then. So it's not always in your control, but always kind of have that cushion, that fund there, to be able to evaluate what your current financial situation is. And you need to look at it from a financial perspective, absolutely. And then you need to look at it from a different perspective of, you know, what about this job am I looking to change? What are the pros and cons of staying, and what are the pros and cons of going? I think that, I had a thought a second ago. That was a good one. Oh, here's my thought that it just like swung past my brain. Something that I did in my contract previous to me leaving the position that I left, I actually negotiated in the contract for my severance. It might have seemed silly at the time, and I know definitely when I was doing it, there were a few people being like, okay, like this seems like an odd thing to kind of negotiate. But my thinking was this: if you don't negotiate your severance and have it in writing, at least in where I work in the contract that I was dealing with, it would default to the province's baseline of this is what you have to pay for severance at a bare minimum. And it wasn't anything good. Like, it wasn't something that made me feel comfortable enough to know, okay, I've worked at this company for X amount of years and I'm only gonna get this in the case they fire me to find something different. And so I negotiated it, because in my thinking, I was like, okay, if I am to get let go, I at least want to know what I'm receiving, to take away one extra thing to do in that situation when you're already navigating so many different emotions and so much is going on and your whole, you know, work life just gets flipped upside down. And it was one thing I could take off of my plate, off of my to-do list, in a situation that might never happen, but it also might happen. So I negotiated severance early on to give myself that safety of, okay, if something out of my control happens with this job, I know at least I have this amount of time and this amount of money to be able to find something new. So just a tip there, maybe think about it when you're coming into your next work agreement, work contract. It gave me a lot of good peace of mind, and maybe it will to you as well. But back to what we're talking about, leaving jobs. Something that I found really valuable in doing during my transition was I sat down and I wrote out an entire list of staying versus leaving. And I wrote down staying, pros and cons. I started to highlight all of the things I really enjoyed about my job, all of the things that I thought of as a pro while staying there, and then looked at the cons of things that I would be lacking if I stayed in the position, and I wrote them down in the cons list. And then on the leaving list, I wrote down the pros of leaving is to best of my knowledge at the time of what I believed that I could get differently. And then I wrote a con list of leaving, you know, uncertainties and all of that. And through doing that practice and sitting down and kind of evaluating strengths and weaknesses of both decisions, looking at the pieces of paper, it was very, very, very clear to me where my decision lied. And I think sometimes when we get all of that out on paper, we take that time to just sit with it and reflect on it, kind of view it from like a position where it's not as personal, like taking a step back and just looking at at it. It might give you a different perspective that perhaps you're needing in this situation. I know that that was really, really helpful for me. And so I recommend to you to try that if you're kind of in this boat of like, well, I don't know, should I stay, should I go? And as you're working through that pros and cons list and you're doing some sort of reflection, if you need some prompts or question prompts, I actually just pulled up the ones that I used when I was going through this analysis. So here you go. These are some of the questions you can ask yourself. 1, do I still add value to my job? 2, am I still learning, developing, and getting value out of my job? 3, could my compensation be different if I were to switch roles or companies? 4, what do I value most in a job right now, and is my current role aligned with that? 5, how does my job complement or impact my personal life, and am I okay with that? 6, are there growth opportunities here for me? 7, is job browsing, applying, interviewing an option for me right now? 8, what kind of challenges could I face by leaving, and how do they compare to the challenges I might face by staying? And then there's also the topic of, well, does your organization have a different role or different department available for you to transition into? Because sometimes we need different, and sometimes that different can be found within our organization itself. I know from my experience, working in different departments in bigger organizations or bigger corporations, it can feel like entirely different companies, depending on who the leadership is, depending on who your manager is. It can truly have such a different work experience, department to department, leader to leader. And so perhaps there might be opportunities for you to explore internally before deciding that, you know, maybe I actually do want to explore external opportunities too. And so if you have job boards, internal job board postings within your company, maybe you just keep an eye on them, kind of keep in the loop of them, see what else might be out there. Maybe there's new projects that you want to get involved in. That might be something you also think about exploring. So it might not be a should I stay or should I go? It might be a should I explore a different opportunity within the organization, or should I go, or should I stay within my current role? And when we're talking about external opportunities or external jobs, I think it's great to always kind of keep your resume brushed up, to apply to jobs, to keep an eye on the market. There's no harm really in staying connected to what else might be out there for you. And I know a lot of people that I deem very successful have stayed really integrated with that, and they're not necessarily looking to jump ship any day, but they're always kind of staying connected to like, what else is out there for me? Am I receiving the market right? Is there something out there for me that interests me more? Where can I brush up on my skills? If you're deciding to leave or looking for an external opportunity, there's nothing to say you can't start that process while you're in your current job. I mean, throwing resumes out, it doesn't need to be a full-time job of doing it, but just kind of passively sending them out. Maybe you meet people you're networking with and you kind of just shoot your resume of, oh yeah, keep me in the loop for any opportunities, keep me in mind kind of thing. It doesn't need to start once you decide to leave a job, and I think that's important, especially if you think about the financial transition from one job to another. So just something to keep in mind. I was looking up some statistics on voluntary turnover over the last couple years. And so from 2023, we saw in Canada, which is where I live, a voluntary turnover rate of 15.5%, which was up from previous 2022's result of 12.4%. Curious to see what this year's will look like. And then in the States, the voluntary turnover rate was 17.3, which was actually down from 2022, which was 24.7%. So that's interesting. In Canada, we're seeing a bit of a rise, or last year we saw a rise, whereas in the States, we actually saw a drop. But as many of us know, we did see that whole great resignation period unfold in 2022 with record numbers of 4.5 million workers, or 3% of US employees leaving jobs per month. Wow. I do remember that. Throwback to the Great Resignation. What a time that was to be alive. So for many of us, money obviously is a huge motivator when it comes to work. Will I make more money staying in my current role and receiving merit increases or slight promotions year over year? Or in a same role or same career path, could I make more money jumping to a different company and job hopping, if you will? Well, it does pay to change jobs. I think many of the research out there does back this. Reading an article on Forbes, and during the second year of the pandemic, according to a research center analysis, half of workers who changed jobs saw their pay increase nearly 10%. 10%. The median worker who stayed at their job saw an inflation adjustment loss of almost 2%. Yeah, so if we look at the inflation year over year of what we're experiencing within our lives, and then the inflation or merit increases or lack thereof we're seeing at our job, you have to take that into account too, because no raise or no merit increase means you're getting paid less because life becomes more expensive, right? I've seen a lot of people see a lot of success with jumping salaries by moving around a lot within jobs. It's something you're gonna have to take into consideration depending on what your main drivers for employment are. It's mostly money for many people, but there's also a lot of other things that contribute to overall satisfaction within a job. We talk about flexibility, autonomy, the people you work with, and just a general good culture, or not good culture, but a culture that aligns with you and your belief systems and values and how you like to work. And, maybe working remote's really important too. So there's so many things to take into account. It's not as simple as to say, oh, you can make more money there, so you'll be more happy there. Like, there's a lot of factors to consider, but I will say when it comes to the whole salary piece of it, I mean, we've just seen statistically, if you look at a lot of the numbers out there, it's hard to compete to staying in a role with how much your salary can increase versus jumping around and find a new job. Do with that information what you will. And with that said, work besties, there's something that I do want to leave you with here. You're never too old to start something new, or to change industries, or to decide that what you're doing right now isn't what you want to do for the rest of your life. I remember I'd like to do this thing, which some people are gonna be like, that's so cringe, whatever. But when I meet people, it's kind of, what did you want to do when you were younger? And they're usually able to answer that quite easily, and it's fun and playful. And then it's, well, what do you do now? And then they share with me their current title and what they do. And sometimes they go deep into length about like their whole job description. And then I throw in, well, what do you want to do when you're older? And people pause. And it's often, well, I hadn't really thought about that. It takes us back a little bit, because I think we were often asked so much when we were younger, like, what do you want to do when you're older? And you had all these dreams and aspirations. And as we age and we get older, we forget that we still get older and we still have a future. And so keeping in mind what's next for you and getting excited about it, and maybe what's next for you is exactly what you're doing. And I think that's beautiful as well. But just keeping in mind, you have a future. There is a lot more ahead of you. You're never too old to learn new skills, to meet new people, to get thrown into different environments. And so if that's what you're feeling called towards, and that's something that you really want to do deep down, then do it. I mean, I think that there's a path and a way that you can set yourself up for success for that, whatever your situation is. And for some people, that's going to be a lot shorter. For some people, it's going to be a lot longer. For some people, it's going to be a lot easier. And for others, you might see a few more roadblocks along the way. But if that's what you really want to do, I'm cheering you on for whatever you decide. And I hope that when you do make this decision, whatever's next for you within your career, that you're making this decision for yourself and you feel so confident in it, and whatever comes along the way on that journey. Just know that you got a Work Bestie community out here that's cheering you on. And as always, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for letting me take up a little bit of time in your day, and we'll see you in the next video. Toodaloo.